I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath, savoring the aroma of freshly baked apple pie. The kitchen was my sanctuary, a place where I could create something beautiful for my family. As I pulled the golden brown crust from the oven, I heard the front door open. "Julie, I'm home." Mark's voice echoed through the house. "In the kitchen, honey," I called back, setting the pie on the cooling rack. Mark appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and a strange expression on his face. I felt a twinge of unease. "Everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. He hesitated, then blurted out, "My parents are moving in with us." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "What? When did this happen?" "Dad called this morning. They're selling the house and, well, they need a place to stay." I gripped the counter, my mind reeling. "And you agreed without talking to me first?" Mark ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't have much choice, Julie. They're my parents." "They're also the people who've criticized every decision we've made since we got married," I reminded him, my voice rising. "Your mother can barely stand to be in the same room as me." "That's not true," Mark protested weakly. "When are they coming?" I demanded. He winced. "Next week." "Next week?" I exploded. "Mark, we have a 2-year-old. Where are we supposed to put them?" As if on cue, Lucy's cry pierced the air from upstairs. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. "We'll figure it out," Mark said, reaching for me. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, you'll figure it out. This is your mess." I untied my apron and tossed it on the counter. "I need to check on Lucy." I brushed past him, my mind racing. How could he do this without consulting me? As I climbed the stairs, memories of past encounters with Claire, Mark's mother, flooded back. Her disapproving glances, her not-so-subtle jabs about my housekeeping and parenting skills. And now she'd be living under our roof? Lucy was standing in her crib, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. I scooped her up, inhaling her sweet baby scent. "It's okay, sweetie," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Mommy's here." I heard Mark's footsteps on the stairs and tensed. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. "Julie, can we talk about this?" I turned to face him, Lucy on my hip. "What's there to talk about? You've already made the decision." "They're family," he insisted. "We can't just leave them without a place to live." "And what about our family?" I shot back. "What about the life we've built here?" Mark sighed. "It's temporary, just until they find a new place." I laughed bitterly. "You really believe that, once your mother gets her claws in, she'll never leave?" "That's not fair," Mark protested. "No, what's not fair is you making this decision without me." I bounced Lucy gently, trying to calm her. "If they move in, you need to promise me something." "Anything," Mark said quickly. I met his gaze, my voice steel. "You stand up for me. When your mother starts in with her criticism and her judgments, you have my back. Can you do that?" Mark hesitated, and in that moment, I saw our future unraveling before my eyes. The happy life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, all of it threatened by this one decision. "I'll try," he finally said. It wasn't the answer I wanted, and we both knew it. As I turned back to Lucy's crib, laying her down gently, I felt a resolve hardening within me. If Mark wouldn't protect our family, I would, no matter what it took. The week flew by in a blur of anxiety and resentment. I threw myself into preparing for Mark's parents' arrival, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed and rearranging furniture to make space. But no amount of cleaning could erase the dread that settled in my stomach like a lead weight. On moving day, I stood on the porch, watching as Robert's car pulled into the driveway. Mark squeezed my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to return the gesture. "Here we go," he murmured. Claire emerged from the passenger seat, her critical gaze sweeping over our modest home. I steeled myself as she approached, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Julie, dear," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "I do hope you've made space in the kitchen. I've brought my own cookware." And there it was, the first jab. I bit back a retort, reminding myself to pick my battles. "Of course, Claire," I managed. "Whatever makes you comfortable." As we helped them unload, memories of past encounters with Claire flooded back. The time she'd reorganized my kitchen during a visit, claiming I didn't know how to properly stock a pantry. The snide comments about my career choices, implying I was neglecting my family by working part-time. Each recollection stoked the fire of resentment burning in my chest. That night, as Mark and I lay in bed, I turned to face him. Remember what you promised, I said quietly. He sighed. Julie, they've only been here a day. Give it time. Time for what? I hissed. For your mother to completely take over our lives. That's not fair, Mark protested. They're just trying to adjust. I sat up, frustration boiling over. And what about us? What about Lucy? When do we get to adjust to having our lives turned upside down? Mark reached for me, but I shrugged off his touch. I need you to have my back, I insisted. When your mother starts in with her criticism, and she will, I need you to stand up for me, for us. He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt the chasm between us widening. I'll try, he finally said, echoing his weak promise from a week ago. I lay back down, turning away from him. Trying isn't enough, Mark. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. I found Claire at the stove, whisking eggs with a disapproving frown. Oh, Julie, she said, eyeing my pajamas. I didn't realize you were sleeping in. I thought I'd make a proper breakfast for once. I clenched my jaw, counting to 10 before responding. That's thoughtful of you, Claire, but I usually handle breakfast for Lucy. Well, you've been doing it wrong, she declared, brandishing her whisk. A growing child needs more than those sugary cereals you feed her. Before I could retort, Mark appeared, Lucy in his arms. Morning, everyone, he said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension. I waited for him to say something, to defend our parenting choices, but he just settled Lucy into her high chair and accepted a plate from his mother with a smile. This looks great, Mom, he said. Doesn't it, Julie? I stared at him, disbelief and betrayal coursing through me. This was exactly what I'd feared, what I'd warned him about, and he was already falling into old patterns, choosing the path of least resistance. I'm not hungry, I said flatly, turning on my heel. As I retreated to our bedroom, I heard Claire's voice floating up the stairs. My goodness, Mark, is she always this sensitive? I waited for Mark's response, for him to finally stand up to his mother, but only silence followed. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I'd given Mark a chance, more than one, to prove he could balance his loyalty to me with his relationship with his parents, and he'd failed. As I sank onto the bed, my mind raced with possibilities. If Mark wouldn't protect our family, our life together, then I would have to take matters into my own hands, no matter what it took. 2 weeks into our new living arrangement, I felt like I was drowning. Every corner of our home now bore Claire's touch, from the rearranged furniture to the constant aroma of her cooking. I'd retreated to the sanctuary of Lucy's room, desperate for a moment of peace, when I heard the front door open. Hello? Anyone home? A familiar voice called out, sending a chill down my spine. I rushed downstairs to find Linda, Mark's sister, standing in our living room, surrounded by suitcases. Linda? I stammered. What are you doing here? She flashed me a saccharine smile. Oh, didn't Mark tell you? I'm moving in too. The room spun. I gripped the banister, struggling to breathe. No, I managed. He didn't mention it. Well, surprise, Linda chirped, oblivious to my distress. Mom and Dad said there was plenty of room, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity for some quality family time. As if summoned, Claire appeared from the kitchen, beaming at her daughter. Linda, darling, you're early. I watched in stunned silence as they embraced, chattering excitedly about Linda's new job in town and how wonderful it would be to all be together again. Julie, Claire said, finally acknowledging my presence. Be a dear and help Linda with her bags. We'll put her in the guest room. The guest room? I echoed weakly. But that's where you and Robert are staying. Claire waved a dismissive hand. Oh, we'll move to Lucy's room. She can bunk with you and Mark for now. It'll be cozy. My vision blurred with angry tears. This was too much. Without a word, I turned and fled upstairs, slamming our bedroom door behind me. I was still shaking with rage when Mark came home an hour later. He found me furiously folding laundry, clothes flying into piles. Hey, he said cautiously. I saw Linda downstairs. I guess she arrived early. I whirled on him. You knew about this? He had the grace to look sheepish. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want to upset you more than you already have. I cut him off. Mark, this is our home, our life, and you're letting your entire family take it over without even consulting me. Julie, please, he pleaded. It's temporary. Linda just needs a place to stay while she gets settled in her new job. And Lucy, I demanded, Where is our daughter supposed to sleep now that your parents are taking over her room? Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now only irritated me. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can set up a little bed in here for her. I stared at him, disbelief etched on my face. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't a solution, Mark. This is chaos. What do you want me to do? He snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. They're my family. And what are we? I shot back, gesturing between us. Aren't we your family too? Before he could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Linda poked her head in, her smile faltering as she sensed the tension. Sorry to interrupt, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But Mom wants to know if you're joining us for dinner, Julie. She's made her famous pot roast. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before I trusted myself to speak. No, thank you. I'm not feeling well. As Linda retreated, I turned back to Mark. This can't go on, I said quietly. Something has to change. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Julie, please, give it time. We'll adjust. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw only uncertainty and weakness. In that moment, I realized that the man I married, the partner I thought I had, was slipping away. No, Mark, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I don't think we will. As I brushed past him and out of the room, leaving him standing alone, I felt something shift inside me. The last threads of hope I'd been clinging to began to unravel, replaced by a cold determination. If Mark wouldn't fight for our family, then I would, and I'd do whatever it took to reclaim the life that was being stolen from us, piece by piece. The days blurred together in a haze of tension and barely contained resentment. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around Claire's constant criticism and Linda's snide remarks. Mark, true to form, remained frustratingly neutral, always quick to change the subject when conflicts arose. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when I overheard Claire and Linda in the kitchen. I don't know how Mark puts up with her, Linda's voice drifted through the door. Did you see how she snapped at him this morning? Well, dear, Claire replied, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Some women just aren't cut out for the demands of family life. It's a shame, really. Mark deserves better. My hands shook as I gripped the laundry basket. I waited for Mark to defend me, to say anything at all. But his voice never came. Unable to contain myself any longer, I stormed into the kitchen. If you have something to say about me, say it to my face, I snapped. Claire's eyes widened in faux innocence. Julie, dear, we were just concerned about you. You seem so stressed lately. Gee, I wonder why, I retorted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Could it be because my home has been invaded by people who can't stop criticizing every move I make? Linda gasped dramatically. How dare you speak to Mom that way? Mark, are you going to let her talk to us like this? I whirled around to find Mark standing in the doorway, his face a mask of discomfort. Mark, I pleaded, please, say something. Stand up for me for once. He looked between me and his family, conflict evident in his eyes. I think everyone just needs to calm down, he said weakly. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Calm down? I echoed incredulously. That's all you have to say? Julie, please, Mark started, but I cut him off. No, Mark, I'm done. I'm done being the villain in this story. I'm done being the one who has to tiptoe around everyone's feelings while mine are completely disregarded. I turned to Claire and Linda, and I'm done pretending that this arrangement is working. It's not. It never was. Claire's face hardened. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if you... If I what? I challenged. Leave? This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. Mom, Dad, Mark interjected, finally finding his voice. Maybe we should talk about finding you and Linda your own place. I felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by Claire's next words. Nonsense, she said firmly. We're family. We stick together. Julie's the one who needs to adjust her attitude. I looked at Mark, silently begging him to stand his ground, but I saw the moment he caved, his shoulders slumping in defeat. We'll figure something out, he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. In that moment, I realized that the man I married, the partner I thought I had, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, unwilling or unable to fight for our family. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, ignoring their calls behind me. In our bedroom, the only space left that felt like mine, I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. For weeks, I'd been holding on to hope that things would improve, that Mark would step up and set boundaries with his family. But now, faced with the harsh reality of his continued inaction, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly under attack in my own home, and I couldn't subject Lucy to this toxic environment. As much as it pained me to admit it, I was starting to see only one way out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce lawyers in our area. As I stared at the search results, a mix of fear and determination washed over me. This wasn't the future I'd envisioned for us, but I refused to be a victim any longer. If Mark wouldn't fight for our family, then I would fight for myself and Lucy. Whatever it took. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the tense silence of the house. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart skip a beat. It was my sister, Sarah. "Julie." Her voice trembled on the other end. "It's Dad. He's in the hospital." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What happened?" I managed to ask, gripping the phone tightly. "Heart attack. They're saying it's serious. You need to come home." I ended the call, my mind racing. I had to go, had to be there for my father. But as I turned to pack a bag, I came face to face with Claire, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And where do you think you're going?" she demanded. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "My father's in the hospital. I need to leave immediately." Claire's lips thinned into a disapproving line. "Now? But we have the charity gala tonight. The whole family is expected to attend." "My father could be dying," I said incredulously. "I don't care about some gala." "Well, you should," Claire snapped. "It's important to Mark's career. Surely your father can wait a day or two." White-hot anger surged through me. "No, he can't, and I'm going, with or without your approval." I brushed past her, heading for our bedroom. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, Mark appeared in the doorway. "Julie, what's going on? Mom said something about you leaving." I explained the situation rapidly, zipping up my bag. "I have to go, Mark. Tonight?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted. "But the gala, my boss will be there. It's a big opportunity for me." I stared at him, disbelief and disappointment warring within me. "Are you serious right now? My father is in the hospital, and you're worried about a work function?" "Of course not," he backpedaled. "It's just, can't you leave in the morning? We could go to the gala tonight and then—" "No," I cut him off, my voice hard. "I'm leaving now. You can stay here with your precious family if that's what's most important to you." As I moved to leave, Claire appeared, blocking the doorway. "You're being selfish, Julie. This isn't just about you. Think of what you're doing to this family." Something inside me snapped. "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about family? Let me tell you something about family. Family supports each other. Family doesn't criticize and belittle at every turn. Family doesn't force their way into someone's home and then try to push them out." I turned to Mark, my eyes blazing. "And family certainly doesn't stand by silently while their spouse is treated like dirt." "Julie, please," Mark started, but I held up a hand. "No, I'm done. I'm going to be with my real family, the people who actually care about me." I pushed past Claire, ignoring her indignant sputtering. As I reached the front door, Linda emerged from the kitchen, a smug smile on her face. "Running away, Julie? I always knew you couldn't handle the pressure of being part of our family." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. In that moment, looking at their smug, self-righteous faces, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about visiting my father. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. "You're right, Linda," I said, my voice steady. "I can't handle being part of this family, because this isn't a family. It's a toxic, manipulative mess, and I'm done with all of it." I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back to the way things were. As the miles stretched between me and the house that had become my prison, a plan began to form in my mind. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about taking back control, and if that meant playing their game, if that meant revenge, then so be it. They had no idea what was coming. I returned home after a week at my father's bedside, emotionally drained but resolute. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. Instead, I found Linda in the living room, practically vibrating with excitement. "Julie, you're back just in time for the big news." Before I could respond, she thrust her left hand in my face, a gaudy diamond ring glittering on her finger. I'm engaged. Can you believe it? For a moment, I stood there, stunned. Then, as if on cue, Claire swept into the room, beaming with pride. Isn't it wonderful, Julie? Our Linda finally settling down with such a nice young man. I forced a smile, my mind racing. Congratulations, Linda. That's quite a surprise. Oh, you haven't even met Steve yet, Linda gushed. He's just perfect. We're having an engagement party next week, and you simply must help us plan it. As Linda prattled on about flower arrangements and guest lists, I caught sight of Mark hovering in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Uncertainty? Before I could decipher it, he looked away. Over the next few days, the house was a flurry of activity as preparations for the engagement party took over. I found myself relegated to the sidelines, watching as Claire and Linda took charge, their excitement a stark contrast to the tension that still simmered beneath the surface. It was during one of these planning sessions that I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I can't believe how well this is working out, Linda's voice drifted from the kitchen. Once Steve and I are married, we'll have even more reason to stay here. Julie won't be able to complain about us taking over then. Claire's smug reply made my stomach churn. Exactly, dear. And with you here to help, we can finally show Mark what a real family looks like. He'll forget all about Julie's little tantrums in no time. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about Linda's engagement. This was a calculated move to push me out completely. As I retreated to my room, my mind whirled with a mix of anger and desperation. I couldn't let them win, couldn't let them destroy everything I'd built, but how could I fight back against a united front of Mark's family? The answer came in the form of a chance encounter. I was at the grocery store, mindlessly pushing my cart down the aisle, when I quite literally ran into a tall, handsome stranger. "I'm so sorry," I stammered, bending to pick up the items I'd knocked from his basket. "No harm done," he replied with a warm smile. "I'm Steve, by the way." I froze, realization dawning. This was Linda's fiancé, the man unwittingly being drawn into our family's toxic web. In that moment, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, perhaps even cruel, but I was out of options. If I couldn't make Mark see reason, maybe I could open Steve's eyes to the truth before it was too late. "It's nice to meet you, Steve," I said, extending my hand. "I'm Julie, Linda's sister-in-law." His eyes lit up with recognition. "Oh, I've heard so much about you. Linda says you're helping with the engagement party planning." I nodded, a plan solidifying in my mind. "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you about that. There's something you should know before you commit to this family." Steve's brow furrowed with concern. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. "It's a long story, but trust me, it's one you need to hear. Can we grab a coffee?" As Steve nodded, agreeing to hear me out, I felt a mix of guilt and determination wash over me. This was it, my chance to expose the truth and maybe, just maybe, save myself and my marriage in the process. But as we walked towards the cafe, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Was I really prepared for the consequences of what I was about to do? My heart raced as I stood in the corner of the crowded living room watching the engagement party unfold. Linda flitted from guest to guest, her diamond ring catching the light, while Claire beamed with pride. Mark hovered nearby, a forced smile plastered on his face. Steve caught my eye from across the room, and I gave him a slight nod. It was time. I'd spent the past week agonizing over my decision, torn between guilt and determination. But after our coffee shop conversation, where I'd shared some of the milder examples of Claire and Linda's behavior, Steve had been eager to learn more. He couldn't quite believe the sweet, charming women he knew could be so different behind closed doors. That's when I'd made my move. "I have proof," I'd told him, my voice barely above a whisper. "If you really want to know the truth, come to the engagement party. I'll show you who they really are." Now, as the party reached its peak, I slipped out of the room and made my way to the study. Steve followed a few minutes later, closing the door behind him. "Are you sure about this, Julie?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, my mouth dry. "You deserve to know what you're getting into." With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the recording I'd captured just days earlier. Claire's voice filled the room, dripping with disdain. That Julie, she's never been good enough for Mark. Always so selfish, putting her own needs first, and now she's trying to turn Lucy against us. Linda's laughter joined in. Don't worry, Mom. Once Steve and I are married, we'll have even more reason to stay here. We'll show Mark what a real family looks like. Julie won't stand a chance. Steve's face paled as the recording continued, revealing more of Claire and Linda's true nature. Their constant criticism, their manipulative tactics, their plans to push me out of my own home. When it finally ended, Steve slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. I can't believe it, he murmured. They seemed so different. They're very good at putting on a show, I said softly, but this is who they really are. Before Steve could respond, the door burst open. Linda stood there, her face flushed with anger. What's going on here? She demanded. Steve stood up, his expression hardening. We need to talk, Linda. Now. As they left the room, I felt a mixture of relief and dread wash over me. I'd done it. I'd revealed the truth. But at what cost? I made my way back to the party, my heart pounding. The room had gone eerily quiet, all eyes on Linda and Steve as they argued in hushed, heated tones near the fireplace. Claire hovered nearby, her face a mask of concern. Suddenly, Steve's voice rose above the murmur of the crowd. It's over, Linda. I can't marry someone who would treat their own family like this. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Linda's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Steve, I don't understand. Ask your mother, Steve said coldly, turning to leave. Ask her about the things you've said about Julie, about your plans to push her out. I've heard it all. As Steve stormed out, all hell broke loose. Linda collapsed into sobs. Claire rushed to comfort her, and the guests began to whisper and point. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Mark's eyes found mine. The look of betrayal and anger on his face made my blood run cold. What have you done? He hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the hallway. I wrenched away from him, left my own anger flaring. I did what you should have done months ago, I shot back. I stood up for myself, for our family. Mark's face contorted with rage. Our family? You've just destroyed our family. As the sounds of Linda's sobs and Claire's attempts to salvage the situation drifted from the living room, I realized there was no going back. I'd lit the match, and now everything was going up in flames. No, Mark, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. You destroyed our family the moment you chose them over us. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in the hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of the life we'd once shared. As I climbed the stairs to pack my bags, I knew that the real battle was just beginning. The weeks following the disastrous engagement party were a blur of heated arguments, tearful conversations, and sleepless nights. But as I stood in our, now my living room, surrounded by packed boxes, I felt a strange sense of calm. Are you sure about this, Julie? Sarah asked, cradling Lucy in her arms. I nodded, taking a deep breath. It's time. I can't live like this anymore. The sound of a key in the lock made us both freeze. Mark walked in, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. He stopped short when he saw the boxes. So this is it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is it, I confirmed, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Mark's face crumpled. Julie, please, we can work this out. I'll ask them to leave. It's too late for that. I cut him off. You've had months to choose us, to stand up for our family, but you didn't, and I can't keep waiting for you to be the husband and father we need. As if on cue, Claire's voice drifted down from upstairs. Mark? Is that Julie? Tell her Linda needs help with the— Not now, Mom. Mark shouted, his frustration finally boiling over. The silence that followed was deafening. I picked up my suitcase, nodding to Sarah to bring Lucy. We're leaving now, Mark. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. Divorce? Mark's voice cracked. Julie, no. Please, let's talk about this. For a moment, I hesitated. The look of desperation in his eyes almost made me waver. But then I thought of all the times I'd begged him to stand up for me, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep feeling alone in my own home. We're done talking, I said firmly. It's time for action. As we walked out the door, I heard Claire and Linda's voices, demanding to know what was happening. Mark's anguished reply faded as we drove away, Lucy babbling happily in her car seat, oblivious to the monumental change taking place. The months that followed were challenging, to say the least. The divorce proceedings were messy. with Claire and Linda trying to paint me as an unfit mother. But I stood my ground, armed with evidence of their behavior and supported by friends who had witnessed their treatment of me over the years. To my surprise, it was Mark who finally put an end to their interference. In a moment of clarity, during a heated courtroom exchange, he stood up and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I've been blind to the truth for too long," he said, his voice shaking. "Julie is an excellent mother, and she deserves better than what I and my family have put her through. I won't contest her custody claim." His words, though late in coming, lifted a weight from my shoulders. As we left the courthouse that day, divorce papers finalized and custody agreement in hand, Mark approached me. "I'm sorry, Julie," he said, his eyes filled with regret, "for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." I nodded, not quite ready to absolve him, but appreciating the gesture. "Take care of yourself, Mark, and maybe think about getting some distance from your family, for your own sake." As I watched him walk away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. But rather than sadness, I felt a surge of hope for the future. Now, a year later, I stand in the kitchen of my new home, watching Lucy play in the backyard. The sound of her laughter fills the air, untainted by criticism or manipulation. I think back to the woman I was, so desperate to keep her family together that she lost herself in the process. That woman is gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of the life she's built. I hear from Sarah that Mark has finally moved out of his parents' house, seeking therapy to address the years of manipulation. Claire and Linda, I'm told, are struggling to accept the new dynamic. Part of me feels a twinge of satisfaction at their discomfort, but mostly I'm just grateful to have escaped their toxic influence. As I join Lucy in the yard, reveling in the simple joy of playing with my daughter, I realize that this moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness is the revenge I truly wanted all along. Not to hurt them, but to free myself, to build a life filled with love, respect, and peace. And as Lucy runs into my arms, her face beaming with trust and adoration, I know that I've finally won the battle that truly matters. "Evelyn, where are you? Why is our house just gone?" Ethan's voice, laced with panic, was music to my ears. I savored the moment, the sweet retribution for his betrayal. "Yes, Ethan, I had it demolished. Everything you left behind is gone." "But why?" His disbelief was palpable. "Because, Ethan, some things are too broken to be fixed," I replied, a cold calmness in my voice. "I am Evelyn, a 45-year-old caregiver, married to Ethan, a 46-year-old marketing executive. Our son, Lucas, had just moved out after college, leaving an echo in our home and apparently in Ethan's sense of responsibility. The day Lucas left, Ethan chuckled, 'Evelyn, he's not a kid anymore. Let him make his own mistakes.' I remember feeling a twinge of annoyance, masked by the relief of seeing them both smile. But that annoyance, that small crack, was about to widen into a chasm. Just as I thought we'd rediscover each other, life took a sharp turn. Dad fell in the yard. Broken bone, maybe. I'm heading to the hospital, Ethan informed me one evening, his voice oddly detached. "Should I come with you?" "No, I got this. Don't worry." But worry I did. At work, I was distracted, feeling an impending sense of doom. Returning home, I found Ethan lounging on the couch, as if his father's fracture was just another minor inconvenience. "He'll need a cane," Ethan said casually, as if discussing the weather. This wasn't just about a cane. This was about Henry, Ethan's father, who had been living alone since his wife passed away 3 years ago. Despite our offers, he had refused to move in with us, valuing his independence. Now the decision was made for him. "We should live with your dad, right?" I asked Ethan, already knowing his answer. "Sure, why not?" He's family. The family home, where Ethan grew up, was more suitable for Henry in his condition. It was settled. We would move in with Henry. Little did I know, this decision was the first step towards an irreversible change, a change that would shatter the very foundations of our life together. That evening, as I looked around our soon-to-be-left condo, memories of Lucas's childhood flooded my mind. There was a bittersweet tang in the air, a mix of nostalgia and foreboding. Ethan's indifference was like a growing shadow in our home, but I was too preoccupied with the logistics of the move to confront it. In my heart, I hoped this move would bring us closer, not just to Henry, but to each other. How wrong I was. The move happened faster than expected. Henry, frail but smiling, welcomed us. Sorry to be a burden, he said, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of memories held within the walls of his home. You're not a burden, Dad. You're family. I assured him, while Ethan just nodded, his mind seemingly elsewhere. That night, as I lay in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the old house, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed more distant than ever, lost in thoughts I could not reach. It was the beginning of the end, the start of a journey that would lead me to the ultimate act of defiance. Little did Ethan know, his world, our world, was about to come crashing down. The walls of Henry's house, steeped in history, were now silent witnesses to a growing rift. As days turned to weeks, Ethan's late returns from work became the norm. His once warm smiles were replaced by a cold, distant demeanor. Evelyn, he's my father. I know how to handle him, Ethan snapped one evening when I expressed my concern about his lack of involvement with Henry. I bit my tongue, the bitterness of his words stinging me. It wasn't just about Henry, it was about us, about what we were becoming, or rather what we were losing. Julia, Ethan's sister, visited one weekend. Her concern was palpable as she watched us moving around each other like distant planets in a decaying orbit. Are you sure about this, Evelyn? Living with Dad, I mean. I can take him if it's too much, Julia offered, her eyes searching mine for a hint of reluctance. I forced a smile. No, Julia, it's fine. We're fine. But we weren't. Ethan's aloofness was growing into a chasm that I could no longer bridge. His excuses for staying out late became more frequent, his explanations more flimsy. Evelyn, I'm just grabbing a drink with colleagues. Networking, you know, he would say, his words lacking the conviction they once held. Networking or escaping? I found solace in Henry's company. Our conversations, filled with stories of the past, were a balm to my growing loneliness. In those moments I felt a connection, a belonging that had started to fade with Ethan. One evening, as I helped Henry with his exercises, his voice trembled. Evelyn, you've been like a daughter to me. I hate to be the cause of any trouble between you and Ethan. I held his hand, assuring him, Henry, you are not the problem. Please don't think that. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't Henry. It wasn't even Ethan's late nights. The problem was something far more sinister, a rot that had set in the core of our marriage. Ethan's indifference was now a gaping hole, swallowing any remnants of the love we once shared. His absence, both physical and emotional, left me grappling with a myriad of unanswered questions. Was this our new normal? A life of silent meals, unshared beds, and unspoken words? I lay awake that night, listening to the creaks of the old house, each groan echoing the turmoil in my heart. I missed Ethan, or rather, the Ethan I thought I knew. The man who now lay beside me, lost in his own world, was a stranger. As the days blurred into each other, Ethan's neglect of both Henry and me became more pronounced. His once excited talks about his day at work dwindled to monosyllables. His late-night returns were now expected, and his excuses a mere formality. The gap between us widened, filled with unspoken accusations and stifled emotions. I was living with a ghost, a shadow of the man I married. It was during one of these sleepless nights that I stumbled upon the first thread of the web of deceit Ethan had been weaving. A thread that would unravel everything we had built together. As I lay there, staring into the darkness, I made a decision. I would no longer be a spectator in this crumbling facade of a marriage. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And if my suspicions were correct, Ethan would soon learn that some actions have irreversible consequences. The stage was set. The actors were in place. The drama of our lives was about to reach its crescendo. The days turned into a monotonous cycle, with Ethan's apathy casting a shadow over the household. His late returns became so routine that I stopped asking where he had been. The silence between us grew louder, filled with unasked questions and unvoiced suspicions. One Saturday, I decided to confront him. Ethan, your father feels neglected. You're hardly here, I said, my voice a mix of frustration and desperation. Ethan scoffed. He's fine, Evelyn. Stop being so dramatic. I have my life too, you know. His words stung, and I recoiled at his dismissiveness. Was this really the man I had loved for all these years? As I tended to Henry, his gratitude only deepened my resentment towards Ethan. You're too good to us, Evelyn. I'm sorry for my son's behavior, Henry whispered during one of our walks. It's not your fault, Henry. I just wish Ethan could see what he's missing, I replied, my heart heavy with unshed tears. Julia's visits became my solace, her presence a stark contrast to Ethan's indifference. "Evelyn, if you ever need to talk, I'm here," she offered one afternoon as we sipped tea in the garden. I nodded, grateful for her support, but too proud to admit how much Ethan's neglect was affecting me. The final straw came on a rainy Thursday evening. Ethan had not returned home and his phone went straight to voicemail. Worried, I waited up, the clock ticking away my patience. He stumbled in past midnight, reeking of alcohol. "Where were you?" I demanded, my worry turning into anger. "Just out, Evelyn." "Stop being such a nag," he slurred, brushing past me. That word, nag, echoed in my mind, igniting a fire within me. I was not a nag. I was a wife concerned about her crumbling marriage. The following week, my suspicions turned into reality. While cleaning, I found a receipt in Ethan's jacket, a hotel receipt dated for a night he had claimed to be working late. My hands trembled as I read the details. Room service, a bottle of champagne, and a single room for two. The betrayal sliced through me, each word on the receipt a confirmation of Ethan's infidelity. My heart raced, a mixture of anger, pain, and disbelief coursing through me. I confronted him that evening, the receipt clenched in my fist. "What is this, Ethan? Explain this to me," I yelled, my composure shattered. Ethan's eyes widened, then narrowed. "It's not what you think, Evelyn. It was just a business meeting that went late." "A business meeting? With champagne in a hotel room?" I spat, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Ethan's silence was the only answer I needed. The truth hung in the air, a tangible presence that neither of us could deny. That night I lay awake, the weight of Ethan's betrayal crushing me. I had been a faithful wife, a caring stepdaughter, and yet this was the payment for my loyalty. As dawn broke, a cold resolve settled over me. Ethan had made his choice, and now I would make mine. It was time for Ethan to learn that every action has consequences. I would no longer be the silent victim of his deceit. The plan started to form in my mind, a plan that would shake the very foundation of Ethan's world. He had underestimated me for the last time. Evelyn, the doting wife and caregiver, was about to show Ethan a side of her he had never seen, a side that even I hadn't known existed. The stage was set for my revenge, and I was ready to play my part to perfection. Ethan's days of betrayal were numbered, and he wouldn't even see it coming. Armed with the bitter truth, I was a storm brewing on the horizon. Ethan's betrayal had lit a fire within me, and I was determined to make him pay. My plan for revenge began to take shape, fueled by each lie he had told, each night he had left me alone. Julia visited again, and this time I didn't hold back. "Ethan's having an affair," I confessed, the words tasting like poison on my lips. Julia's shock quickly turned to anger. "That bastard! How could he do this to you, to Dad?" "We need to do something, Julia. I won't let him get away with this," I said, my voice steady with newfound resolve. "We'll figure this out, Evelyn. I'm with you," Julia assured, her hand gripping mine. The opportunity presented itself when Ethan casually mentioned an upcoming business trip. "A week in New York. Big project," he said, avoiding my gaze. "A week, huh?" I mused, a plan forming in my mind. "Have a good trip." But it wouldn't be the business trip Ethan was expecting. No, this would be the week when his world would come crashing down. I started my preparations the moment he left. With Julia's help, I gathered evidence of his affair, hotel receipts, phone records, late-night messages. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Next, I contacted a lawyer to discuss divorce and property rights. I would not only leave Ethan, but I would also strip him of everything he held dear. His betrayal had cost him more than just our marriage. It would cost him his home, his comfort, his security. "Evelyn, are you sure about this?" Julia asked, concern etched on her face. "I've never been more sure of anything," I replied, a cold determination in my voice. While Ethan was living it up in New York, oblivious to the storm brewing back home, I was executing my plan with precision. The house, Ethan's childhood home, was the first to go. I hired a demolition crew, explaining that the house was old and needed to be torn down for safety reasons. As the bulldozers tore through the walls, I watched with a sense of grim satisfaction. This was more than just a physical demolition. It was symbolic of the destruction of our marriage. Next, I arranged for the sale of the land. The property was in my name, thanks to Ethan's careless handling of the paperwork. The land would fetch a good price, and the money would be mine alone. As the days passed, my plan unfolded flawlessly. I was no longer the betrayed wife. I was the architect of Ethan's downfall. Finally, the day of Ethan's return arrived. I waited for his call, the anticipation a sweet torture. "Evelyn, where are you? What happened to the house?" Ethan's voice was laced with confusion and panic. "I had it demolished, Ethan. And the land, it's been sold," I replied, each word a dagger to his heart. "What? Why? Evelyn, that was our home," he stammered, his voice a mix of disbelief and despair. "It was a house, Ethan, not a home. And now it's gone, just like our marriage," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But why? How could you do this?" Ethan's plea was pathetic, a far cry from the confident man he once was. "You made your choice, Ethan. Now I've made mine. Goodbye." With that, I hung up, cutting off any further pleas or excuses. As I sat in the silent room, a sense of liberation washed over me. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life. Ethan's betrayal had shattered our marriage, but it had also awakened a strength in me that I never knew I had. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And as I looked ahead to my new life, free from lies and deceit, I knew one thing for sure. Ethan would never forget the name Evelyn. Ethan's world had crumbled, and I was the architect of its downfall. The day he returned, I waited, knowing he would confront me. As expected, his car screeched to a halt where our home once stood, now just an empty lot. "What have you done, Evelyn?" Ethan bellowed as he approached, his face a mask of shock and anger. "I freed myself from a life of lies and deceit," I replied calmly, my resolve unshaken. "This was my childhood home. How could you?" His voice cracked under the weight of his loss. "Your childhood home? You mean the house where you neglected your father and betrayed your wife?" My words were sharp, cutting through the air between us. Ethan staggered, as if my words were physical blows. "Evelyn, please, let's talk about this." "Talk? Like you talk to your mistress?" I countered, the bitterness in my voice unmistakable. "You don't understand. It was a mistake," Ethan pleaded, his eyes searching for any sign of the love that once bound us. "A mistake repeated is a choice, Ethan, and you chose her over us, over everything we built together," I said, the finality in my voice echoing in the empty space. Ethan looked around, desperation taking hold. "But where will I go? What about my things?" "Your things are in storage. As for where you'll go, that's no longer my concern," I stated, devoid of any sympathy. "I never thought you could be this cruel." Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Cruel? No, Ethan, I'm not cruel. I'm just no longer your fool," I replied, turning away from the ruins of our past. Ethan's voice faded as I walked away, leaving him amidst the debris of his choices. I had exacted my revenge, not out of cruelty, but out of respect for myself. As I drove away, the weight of the past years seemed to lift off my shoulders. I was no longer bound by Ethan's betrayal or the confines of a loveless marriage. In destroying our physical home, I had built myself a new one, a sanctuary of self-respect and dignity. Ethan had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take away my strength or my ability to start anew. I had closed the chapter on Ethan and our life together. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist, not a victim of someone else's script. Ethan's downfall was the price he paid for his betrayal. As for me, I had gained something far more valuable, my freedom and a chance to rediscover who I was before I lost myself in our marriage. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was a road I looked forward to traveling. Ethan was a part of my past, a chapter closed and left behind. The future was mine to shape, and I embraced it with open arms and a heart free of the chains of betrayal. The aftermath of the house's demolition left Ethan in a state of shock and desperation. A few days later he called, his voice laced with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Evelyn, we need to talk. Meet me at the cafe on 5th, please." I agreed, curious to see how he would try to spin this tale. At the cafe, Ethan sat hunched over, a shadow of his former self. "Evelyn, why are you doing this? You've destroyed everything," he blurted out as I sat down. "Destroyed everything. Ethan, you did that when you chose to have an affair," I replied, my tone even but firm. "That was a mistake. But this, what you're doing, it's unforgivable." His voice cracked, his facade of control crumbling. "A mistake? No, Ethan. A mistake is forgetting to pay a bill, not cheating on your wife." I countered sharply. "You can't just take everything from me. The house? The money? What about me?" Ethan's plea was pathetic, tinged with selfishness. What about you? What about me, Ethan? Or did you forget that there were two people in this marriage? I challenged. Ethan's face contorted with frustration. You're being unreasonable. You're ruining my life over a fling. A fling? Is that what you call breaking our vows, our trust? My voice rose, attracting glances from nearby tables. Evelyn, please, we can fix this. I'll end it with her. We can go to counseling, Ethan offered, desperation seeping into his voice. Fix this? There's nothing left to fix, Ethan. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it, I said, my decision clear and unwavering. I'll lose my job, my reputation. You don't understand the consequences, he pleaded. The consequences? You should have thought of that before. Hanish, as for your job and reputation, those were never my concern, I replied, my tone icy. Ethan slumped, defeated. So, what now? A divorce? Yes, a divorce. And since you're so concerned about consequences, I've recorded this conversation. Admitting to your affair will make the proceedings much smoother, I revealed, watching as the color drained from his face. You recorded me? Ethan gasped, his eyes wide with shock. Yes. It's time for you to face the consequences of your actions, Ethan. You've lost more than just a house. You've lost a wife who loved you, a family that respected you, and a life that you took for granted, I stated, standing up to leave. As I walked away, I didn't look back. Ethan's voice, calling out to me, was just a distant echo. I had closed that chapter of my life, and there was no turning back. The price of betrayal was high, and Ethan was paying it in full. I had not just sought revenge, I had sought justice for myself. The future was uncertain, but it was a future where I was no longer shackled by Ethan's deceit. I was free, and that freedom was the sweetest victory of all. The dust had settled, and Ethan's world was irrevocably altered. The divorce proceedings were swift, fueled by the incontrovertible evidence of his affair. He tried to argue, to fight, but the truth left him with no ground to stand on. As I sat across from him in the lawyer's office for the final signing, he was a mere shell of the man I once knew. Evelyn, please, can't we rethink this? Ethan's voice was a desperate whisper. There's nothing left to rethink, Ethan. You made your choices, and now I've made mine, I replied, my voice steady and resolute. With each signature, I felt a chapter of my life closing, a chapter filled with pain, betrayal, and ultimately liberation. When it was over, Ethan tried to speak, but I cut him off. There's nothing more to say, Ethan. Goodbye. Leaving the office, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I was no longer Ethan's wife. I was Evelyn, free and unbound. In the weeks that followed, Ethan's life continued to unravel. His job was lost, a casualty of the scandal. His reputation, once impeccable, was now tarnished by the truth of his indiscretions. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment, a stark contrast to the life of comfort he once knew. His mistress had left him, unwilling to deal with the fallout of their affair. Ethan was alone, a consequence of his own making. As for me, I started anew. The money from the sale of the land allowed me financial freedom, and I found peace in my independence. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had long forgotten, and found joy in the small things. Julia and I remained close, our bond strengthened by the trials we faced together. You're stronger than you ever realized, Evelyn, she said to me one evening over dinner. I guess I am, I replied, a smile playing on my lips. My new life was simpler but richer in ways that money couldn't buy. I had respect, dignity, and a sense of self that no one could take from me. Ethan tried to reach out a few times, but I never responded. That chapter of my life was closed, and I had no intention of revisiting it. I often thought about the house, the symbol of our broken marriage. In its destruction, I had found my strength. It was a drastic step, but it was necessary for me to break free. Now, looking ahead, I saw a path filled with possibilities. A path where I was the author of my own story, no longer a character in someone else's drama. The road to recovery was not easy, but it was mine to travel. I had survived the storm, and in its wake, I found a peace I never knew existed. Ethan's betrayal had shattered me, but in those broken pieces I found myself, and that was the greatest victory of all.